October 25, 1415. A sodden field outside Agincourt. 5,000 English longbowmen stood ankle-deep in mud, and yet by dusk, 6,000 French men-at-arms lay broken, bloodied, and rotting. What the war chronicles failed to record. A duke's bastard son murdered his commanding officer the night before the battle, after discovering him in bed with his mother, then altered troop formations to sabotage an entire flank. Before we continue, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I read everyone. The mud swallowed boots and honor alike. Dawn brought not glory, but gritted teeth and rotting breath. Henry V, aged 28, stood flanked by his bannermen, but his gaze locked not on the French lines, but on the northern trees, where his scouts reported movement not 10 minutes earlier. They had found the torn-up corpse of Sir Reginald Grey, age 47, his throat slit with a dagger bearing the Stafford crest, the same crest worn by Edward Stafford, the bastard son of the Duke of Buckingham. Edward claimed it was French raiders. He lied. In truth, he caught Reginald rutting Madame Clarice, his mother, in a hunting tent 3 days prior. His revenge wasn't just personal. That night, he delayed the left flank's advance by 30 minutes, knowing the gap would bait the French cavalry straight into the soft center and the killing zone of English arrows tipped with broadhead steel. Trumpets wailed like wounded beasts. The French nobility surged forward, 12,000 strong, their banners dazzling beneath overcast skies, gold lions, crimson fleur-de-lis, and the blood-soaked pride of a dynasty drunk on its own arrogance. But the field was no place for pageantry. It was a slaughterhouse made of mud and splinters. English longbowmen, many mere farm boys aged 16 to 19, unleashed volleys with monastic rhythm every 6 seconds. A shaft screamed through the mist. Arrows punched through plate visors, tore through cheeks, pinned men to their dying horses. Steel met mud, flesh met splinters, blood met drowning. French knights collapsed under their own ranks, trampled by comrades too armored to halt. The chroniclers wrote of honor and fate. They did not write about the screams 1,000 men, buried alive in horse piss and clay, or the young archer who slit a knight's throat just to silence his prayers, or the 23 noble corpses later found stripped naked and sodomized with snapped lances, likely not by English hands, but by their own servants turned looters in the chaos. This was not chivalry. This was vengeance fed with rainwater and rot. Somewhere between butchered prayer and panicked stampede, the French rear line stumbled upon sabotage. A stretch of ridge they believed secure collapsed underfoot, the work of saboteurs who had loosened the sod days before. Edward Stafford again. He fed a bribe to a local ploughman for the layout, then dispatched 2 deserters, turned traitors to weaken the bank with midnight shovels. When the mounted men surged over it, the earth gave way like a trapdoor. Dozens crashed into a gully hidden beneath reeds, skewered not by lances but by splintered javelins planted like teeth. As blood pooled in the ditch, Henry V advanced to the right with his personal guard. His sword, a double-edged bastard blade forged in Bordeaux, and stained that day with the blood of 8 chevaliers. Yet even as the French lines broke, not all were fleeing. Some were whispering scandal-born orders spreading like plague. Charles d'Albret, the French constable, had been fed false charges that 2 dukes in his command had betrayed him for royal favor. The deceit, planted by a Welsh mercenary who once bedded d'Albret's niece, then sold her letters love-drenched and treason-laced to both kings. They were forgeries, but they worked. Distrust snapped command. Orders stopped. Units froze mid-charge, and in the silence, the arrows sang again. The betrayal did not end with forged letters. Deep in the chaos, a French squire named Roland de la Tour, aged 22, drove a miséricorde into the gut of his own master, Count Philippe de Sancerre, shouting that it was justice for his sister, Leonore, raped by Philippe during a drunken feast 2 years prior. Blood and bile spilled over polished greaves as Roland vanished into the maelstrom, never to be seen again. The Count's banner fell, and 3 companies beneath it panicked, thinking their commander slain by English hands. The retreat started not from defeat, but from a murder disguised by war. Meanwhile, Henry's most lethal battalion comprised of veterans from the Welsh marches, all branded at one time or another as thieves or worse, moved like ghosts through the flanks. Armed with bills, mauls, and hook-headed glaives, they did not fight to win. They fought for pardons and plunder. One took the ear of a French noble as a trophy, said to have chewed and swallowed the lobe on a dare. Another, known only as Grigor the Smith, used a crow's beak to peel open visors like mussel shells, laughing as he smeared brains on his cheeks for protection. The French could not match it, not in discipline, not in desperation, and certainly not in hunger. For many of Henry's men hadn't eaten properly in 3 days. They saw rations in every corpse. The kitchens boiled flesh that evening, and no one asked if it was horse, man, or both. The only noble feast at Agincourt was one of agony, betrayal, and the last breath of chivalry drowned beneath a rain of arrows and the mud of crimes no herald dared record. By mid-afternoon, the French commanders, bloodied and staggered, played their final hand a charge of reserve cavalry led by the indomitable Sir Jean de Brienne, age 41, a man who once claimed no English sword would stain his blood. Yet in his saddlebag, hidden beneath prayer cloth, was a letter confessing his affair with Queen Isabeau of Bavaria, Henry's one-time suitor turned enemy queen. The affair lasted 7 moons, their meetings cloaked by pilgrimage, ruses and scribes bribed to misdate letters. That letter, intercepted days before by Henry's spymaster, was passed to a captured friar under pain of death, who then confessed it to English archers for the promise of coin and safety. Sir Jean de Brienne rode into what he believed was glory, but was already marked a traitor by those he served, executed in the mind of his own king. His charge pierced the front, for a time, until a wall of stakes and men who no longer fought like soldiers but like cornered beasts swallowed the cavalry whole. When Jean's corpse was found, there were 7 arrow shafts in his chest, but his hands were restrained behind his back, his throat slit while still alive. Execution, not battle death. No herald accounted for that, nor did they speak of the 3 squires who vanished after the fight, last seen dragging a chest of Florentine coin, the price paid to kill de Brienne before his mouth could betray a queen. The sky dimmed over Agincourt, not with storm cloud, but with the smoke of burning letters, looted standards, and the sins of hundreds cremated in haste before the priests arrived. One field, soaked in French blood and royal shame, and still, the woods whispered of secrets not yet unearthed, because some betrayals, like victory, are written in carnage too costly to name. But even as the smoke thickened and the crows took their first claim, within Henry's camp, scandal stirred in silk and whispers. Lady Eleanor Holland, aged 29, sister to the Earl of Kent and widow to a fallen lord, had travelled with the convoy under guise of attending the royal chapel. In truth, her journey served passion, not piety. Her tryst with Henry's chief engineer, Master Alaric Thorne, aged 42, had lasted 19 months, begun in the steam of a siege tent near Harfleur, where blueprints turned to bedding. She used code stitched into her bodices. He used dirt maps folded under altar cloths. That night at Agincourt's end, they met again behind the wreckage of a shattered supply wagon, linen torn, fury muffled. But as she stumbled from the encounter, she was seen by Sir Thomas Erpingham himself. The old commander said nothing until the next morning, when Alaric was found hanged by his own measuring cord, a false suicide staged with military precision. Eleanor vanished before dawn with a purse full of coin and a royal signet. No one dared question her. The chronicles would note a glorious victory won by holy cause. But beneath the gilded lies writ in Latin ink, 6,000 French knights rotted in shame, 1 royal consort absconded in silence, and half the English nobility dined on bones while secrets burned beneath their feet. Agincourt ended on the field, but its truths perished in bedchambers, gallows, and blood-choked soil. And the echoes still murmur in the mud, in the moans, in the missing names erased by men too afraid to write them. In the weeks that followed, as Henry led his battered yet brutally triumphant army back across the Channel, the silence surrounding Agincourt began to thicken like fog. Official reports cited divine justice, tactical genius, and the righteousness of England's cause. But within the court of Rouen, whispers reeked of poison, coin, and flesh. Documents disappeared. Witnesses were promoted. The names of saboteurs, assassins, and adulterers were struck clean from record. Edward Stafford was granted lands near Shrewsbury and never charged for Reginald Grey's death. Lady Eleanor's name faded from the rolls, her signet never returned, and the 3 squires who vanished with de Brienne's bribe Rumor claims 2 were murdered en route to Florence, the third seen years later as a mercenary captain in Naples. No monument bears their names, no verse sings their part. But for every noble tomb erected after Agincourt, a dozen graves were left unmarked, unacknowledged casualties of the scandals, murders, and betrayals that cleaved just as deep as any blade. The French lost the battle, but history lost the truth. And along the northern hedgerows, where arrow shafts still rise from the earth like bone fingers, something still weeps beneath the soil, not for the fallen, but for what men did to win. The war ended. The crime was buried. The scandal faded to whisper. But 3 corpses, 2 lovers, and 1 throne told a different story, one chroniclers refused to write. Yet not even death could quench every voice. Months after the bloodbath at Agincourt, in a Benedictine scriptorium west of Calais, a monk named Brother Anselm copied war orders into the royal archives. But one scroll he buried, not filed parchment lined with a confession from a dying archer named Elias Brewster. Elias, aged 31, claimed he was paid 4 gold nobles to deliver a false report the night before the clash, asserting that the French forces planned a feint south. His benefactor? A woman bearing the House of Orleans crest, who passed him the coin wrapped in lace, scented with rose oil and venomous perfume. Elias never learned her name, only that she carried a silver ring, matching one worn by a chambermaid in the English Queen's household. He dictated the truth while fevered from infected wounds, his breath shallow, his tone cracked. The monk, fearing excommunication or worse, hid the scroll under the floorboards. It was never found again. Only his marginalia survived, scrawled in ink along the Psalm of Lamentation. They say God won Agincourt, but I saw devils make the victory. And so the bones of Agincourt do not sleep beneath sacred stone, but in silence splattered with lust, lies, and lingering blood. The English sang psalms, toasted the king, forged medals from melted spurs, but mothers wept over sons buried without names, and knights once drunk on chivalry awoke, trembling from dreams of screams they could not silence. Henry returned a hero, but with every step toward crown and conquest, ghosts followed of bastards who murdered for revenge, of squires who slit throats in secret justice, of lovers who killed to keep their scandal warm in exile. The records tell us it was victory ordained by heaven, but the sky over Agincourt saw no angels, only arrows, fire, and the unholy hunger of war. The banners fell. The scandal was scrubbed. But on cold October winds, the curses still echo, proof that glory, once steeped in sin, never truly fades. It festers, it feeds. And long after crowns rust and chronicles lie, the field whispers one name you were never meant to hear. Edouard de Camois, chronicler for the ducal court of Burgundy, penned no final entry for Agincourt. His ink dried stiff after writing just 3 lines. The field bled, the king prayed, the truth died. But sealed in his travel case, found decades later inside the walls of a collapsed priory, was a single folio titled only Les Malédictions. It listed no tactics, no dates, merely names, 42 of them, some English, most French, and beside each, a symbol: dagger, coin, heart, flame, codes for death, bribe, affair, arson. Among them, E. Stafford, burned; L. Holland, a heart pierced; R. de la Tour, a dagger doubled. These were not battle honors. These were sins catalogued by someone who saw the war not as a clash of nations, but as a ledger of betrayal. The list ends with a final line, barely legible beneath centuries of mildew. Agincourt was not won. It was paid for with lies, flesh, and silence, and God wept in the mud. So remember this: not every death cried out, not every hero carried honor, and not every victory belonged to kings. Some were bought, some were seduced, and some were carved in secrecy into a field that never stopped thirsting for blood. Now, only the field remains, a patch of earth in northern France, where wild poppies grow not from peace, but from what still seeps beneath. No royal decree erased the sulphur stink of burned lies. No prayer sung in Westminster soothed the shrieks choked beneath English boots. The blood has become soil, the sin become legend, the silence become legacy. Whisper any anthem you wish for victory, and the soil will answer with rot. The longbowmen are gone, their bones folded into furrows. The lords who plotted, perished, vanished, or simply dined on the spoils are dust. And yet, when the wind cuts low across Agincourt's fields, it does not whistle, it hisses. It says names never written. It repeats cries never recorded. It begs no glory, only remembrance. For in the end, the truth was not slain. It was buried alive, face down, next to the guilty, beneath banners rotted and vows broken. And if you listen closely, where arrowheads still hide like teeth among the roots, you may hear what the chronicles feared most of all, the sound of victory choking on its own confession. And so, Agincourt became not a chapter of triumph, but a mausoleum of secret debts. The kingsman to parchment, scrubbed stories varnished in Latin gloss, told of God's favor and English resolve. But beneath that litany of glory sprawled a darker scripture written in blood's cursive, in ash-smudged kisses behind shattered shields, and in the final gasps of men who bore not just wounds, but unspeakable truths. The field bore witness to conquest, yes, but also to poisoning by perfume, to a mother's sin buried by her son's vengeance, to a queen's desire that triggered death at the blade's tip. Even now, there are whispers among the hedgerows that not all who fell that day rest in God's light. Some remain watching, waiting, whispering under the poppies, not for justice, not for redemption, but for someone to finally say what the chronicles would not, that Agincourt was a victory boiled in betrayal, spiced with seduction, and served on a platter of lies, too rich for history to swallow. The banners decayed, the bastard blade rusted, the lords died, revered, but every breath of wind across that haunted pasture recites the final truth, that beneath the march of armies, beneath the roar of victory, it was scandal that bled longest, and that sin, once spilled in mud, grows roots far deeper than honor ever could. Even now, the clergy who pray over English kings dare not utter Agincourt's full truth. In bard songs and church-led remembrance, they mark the field with hymns and sanctimony. But stone-walled monasteries from Rouen to York still carry records missing entire weeks, scribal gaps burned into vellum with fire set not by accident but intent. Some archivists claim King Henry ordered the destruction of 47 pages, detailing the days before and after Agincourt, their ink too volatile, their names too damning. Whether by royal hand or trembling monk's terror, those pages vanished. What survived were cleaned tales of courage and providence. But the monks who buried sin in footnotes, in marginalia, knew different. Agincourt was not a triumph of virtue. It was ritual, blood-soaked and compromise-bound, a sacrifice not to God but to silence. And silence cannot pray. It corrodes, it poisons, it births myths heavy with gold and hollow with guilt. So if you ever walk that field, do not call it sacred, call it honest, a mirror of everything we fight to claim and destroy in the claiming. Glory, victory, love, all drowned in that mud, still churning with the buried breath of the forgotten and the damned. No statue marks the lover who hung, the traitor who ruled, or the queen whose kiss condemned, but step between the bent hedgerows and scarred tree stumps around Agincourt, and you step into their story. Not the one carved in marble or sung in chapel choirs, but the one whispered through root and bone. The peasant who dug trenches filled them with more than rain. The soldier who prayed for salvation left behind a dagger inked with initials not his own. The noblewoman who fled under moonlight did so with not just gold, but the final letter of a dead man still wet with wax. These are the dead without tombs, the sinners without songs, and though time has smothered their names, it could not burn their acts. Because victory rots like flesh if fed by secrets, and Agincourt's soil remains rich with both. Remember it not for what they told you. Remember it for what still weeps beneath the sins unatoned, the love unburied, the war that ended not in peace, but in whispers too bloodied to fade.